What if you've been trained your whole life to do something, but suddenly you start to question if it's right? Well, there are some really interesting studies that look at how and why we obey rules and authority figures and what happens when those rules might not be in our best interest. I'm a psychiatrist and I make mental health education videos. This video will discuss the dark side of following orders. And first, we have to talk about one of the most famous studies ever done on obedience, which was conducted by a psychologist named Stanley Milgram. You know, when I hear about these studies, I think about how many people are involved in doing the research. I wonder what it was like for the researchers when they got the funding to conduct this study, the participants to join the study, and the participants who had to recruit other people to be in the study. Was there any follow-up after the study was completed? In any case, this study was repeated several times, so I'll try to keep it brief. So he had an experimental setup in which participants were recruited through newspaper ads to Yale University under the guise of a study about memory and learning. Participants were randomly assigned to be either an instructor or a learner. As the study began, the learner was strapped to a chair and electrodes were attached to his wrist. The instructor was told that the learner would be receiving electric shocks to his wrist whenever he gave a wrong answer, and the intensity of the shocks would increase with each wrong answer. The learner was actually a researcher who was pretending to be a participant, and the shocks were fake. The instructor was also told that although the shocks looked real, they weren't painful, but as the study progressed, the learner would cry out in pain and then stop responding. Even after receiving painful shocks, the instructors would still tell him to continue as they were instructed by the lead researcher who was off camera. In this scenario, the majority of instructors were willing to deliver shocks of up to 450 volts, which would have been painful if the learner actually received them. The 40 participants in the first experiment none stopped below 300 volts, and the average shock delivered was about 375 volts. Now, some people said they heard the learner crying out, but they still wanted to finish the experiment. Other people reported feeling tension in their arms while holding the shock lever, but they still went ahead with it. Some participants were even angry at the learner for being so foolish and couldn't understand why he didn't respond. To the experiment, the researchers debriefed the participants. They explained that the learner was not actually being shocked, and although the experiment was shocking to watch, no one was harmed. The researchers found that when they changed the setting to a less prestigious location, the level of obedience dropped dramatically. So it looks like people are more likely to follow destructive orders when the orders are given by an authority figure in a prestigious environment. Another study by Phillips and Bartle supports this idea that people will conform to authority figures, even when asked to do something they don't want to do. He set up a mock prison in the basement of Stanford University to investigate how people become aggressive toward other people. The people participating in the study volunteered for what they thought was going to be a study about prison life. Some of them were randomly selected to be guards and others were prisoners. Within hours, the guards started to assert dominance over the prisoners, treating them like numbers instead of actual human beings. The guards made up various rules, kept the prisoners locked in their cells, forced them to participate in meaningless tasks, and yelled at them if they didn't comply. The prisoners quickly became depressed, anxious, and showed signs of severe stress like crying, anger, and loss of appetite. The study had to be ended early because of the psychological harm inflicted on the participants. Again, this shows how people can be influenced to act aggressively toward others when there is an authority structure in place. Now let's talk about some reasons why we obey authority figures. First, we have to consider the evolutionary reason. Humans are social creatures who live in groups. To function in a group, there must be a hierarchy. And somewhere at the top of the hierarchy is an authority figure who is able to make decisions faster than anyone else, because they don't have to deliberate with every other person in the group. Evolutionary psychologists would say that humans developed a natural instinct to listen to authority figures in order to survive and thrive in a group. This instinct is called authority bias. We naturally look to people in positions of authority to guide us and protect us. Second, blind obedience can feel safer than independent thinking. Blind obedience makes it easy to avoid responsibility for decisions. If you're told to do something, you can simply comply rather than making the decision yourself. If things go wrong, you can blame the authority figure who gave the order. Not having to think for yourself means you won't get into trouble for making the wrong decision. Interestingly, Neuroscientists have found that when people are given orders to follow, their brain activity suggests that they feel less responsible for their behavior. Specifically, they found that activity decreases in the prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain that deals with self-awareness and personal responsibility. When an authority figure tells you what to do, your brain reacts as if you won't get in trouble for doing it. Third, there may be a misalignment between the goals of an organization and the goals of its members. That doesn't mean that the members are malicious. It's just that their perspective is different. For example, if you're a soldier in the army, you might be ordered to deploy to a foreign country to fight a war. Your commander wants to win the battle, but you just want to get back home to your family. You might question the purpose of the war, or maybe you just don't want to die. But there's a structure in place that tells you to follow orders no matter what you think. Here's the thing, there's no simple solution to prevent people from obeying destructive orders. But here are some ways that we can improve the situation. No. 1. Pause before acting. If you're not sure you want to follow an order, you can buy yourself some time to think about it. Just saying, I need some time to think about this is reasonable. Nobody should force you to make a snap decision that you're not comfortable with. No. 2. Ask questions. If you're not clear on the details of an order, ask for clarification. And if you still don't understand after the clarification, then you can ask to speak to a higher authority. No. 3. Consider consequences. What could happen if you follow this order? Is it likely to cause harm to yourself or others? Will it go against your values? Thinking about the consequences can help you decide whether you want to follow the order. And no. 4. Build confidence. It's not always easy to speak up, especially when you're in a position where you think you should just do what you're told. But practice speaking up in situations where you feel like you can manage the consequences. This might mean politely asking a friend to stop playing music that's too loud, telling a salesperson that you don't want what they raise selling, or standing up to a bully at work. Practice can make it easier to stand up to authority figures in the future. We also have to acknowledge that organizations can play a role in preventing destructive orders from being given in the first place. Encouraging transparency, creating a culture where people can speak up without fear of reprisal, and establishing reward systems that reinforce ethical behavior can make a big difference. At the end of the day, we all have a responsibility to be good critical thinkers, and that means not blindly following authority. It means examining evidence, considering alternatives, asking questions, and being willing to change our minds when presented with new information. Yes, we evolved to recognize authority figures, but we also evolved to use our brains. So we should try to strike a balance between respecting authority and following our own moral compass. If this video was helpful, please hit the like button. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the topic. Subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, thanks for watching.